So, good evening, everyone. We're very glad to see you here at the Biomechanics Contemporary Music Festival. And thank you for coming, especially a special thanks to those who made it here. It's heavily snowfall today. And today we're going to present you our third guest, composer Marco Ciciliani. And at the beginning, I will tell you about our meeting today, because it will contain 3 parts. At the first part, we have an interview with Marco. Then the soloist of CEAM Artists will perform his pieces, Formula -1 and Kilgore, and some annotations and texts there are on our website. So, and the last part will be your questions. And so please be free to ask the questions. If you can ask it in Russian, if you have problems with English, and we will help you with translation. And we will have a free microphone, and Alexander, I think, will help you with this. So, I think we're going to start. Hello, Marco, and thank you for coming today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's really a pleasure and honor to be your guest. Thanks.
Marco Ciciliani is a composer, intermediate artist, and performer. He is a professor for computer music, composition and sound design at the Institute of Electronic Music and Acoustics of the University of Music and Performing Arts in Graz. And today we're going to talk about audiovisual music and your experience of it as a composer and as a researcher. As I was preparing this talk, I found a wonderful article written by you, which I recommend to all of our viewers. It's called Music in the Expanded Field, on the recent approach to interdisciplinary composition. And this article is about music, but I think it might be of interest not only for those who are professionally involved in music, but who just interested in this field. So my first question is, how did you begin to move towards audiovisual composition and extended music practice?
That's a long story, but I'll try to keep it short. It started in the early 2000s, and I was just at a certain point curious to expand music into visual fields. And at that time, I decided to approach this topic with the use of lighting, which means that I developed compositions where I integrated parts for a sort of light installation, you could say, which was part of the composition. So the most famous example of such a use of lighting is probably Prometheus by Scriabin. And I've been doing that for a while, so then gradually I expanded also into the use of laser, which is of course also a form of light. And then between 2007 and 2010, I made a doctorate at Brunel University in London, which gave me the possibility to really focus on this particular artistic approach to compose with light and for musical instruments. After the doctorate, during the doctorate, I deliberately stayed away from video just to kind of not open the door into a very complex additional domain. But then after I had finished the doctorate, I was tempted to explore that field as well. And so, as you see, I gradually expanded my the visual tools that I integrated with my music. And more recently, I would say that this sort of audiovisual practice expanded even more into other fields. So I've done a couple of projects more recently where I also use or where I also started to work on texts as part of compositions, or I expanded into other media like augmented reality, or as we will see tonight, also in Kilgore, virtual spaces and stuff like that. So in a way, I have the feeling that for quite a while, I was very much researching in this question of audiovisuality. How can a very tight relationship be established between video or visuals and music? And since a few years, this has expanded more into sort of hybrid compositions, which are often also between installations and concerts, or as I mentioned, like additional media like augmented reality, etc.
So that sounds great. And in the article, you cite responses from your composers' colleagues about the skills that a composer might need today. And I would like just to to tell about it. So you mentioned the use of video and softwares, VJ tools, film and photo cameras, staging, lighting, programming languages, communication protocols, working with microprocessors, physical computer, soldering, tailoring, book layout, and more. So you worked and you work with light and video, and which of these skills you developed?
You mean which skills from the long list you just read, which I developed? Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, most of them to a certain extent. So I learned to work with video softwares, programming languages, things like color corrections. I also did book layouts and so on. So it's true that this is a sort of characteristic of this direction of composing. When you get your hands dirty with other media, you just in a way have to dig into it and learn it. And that said, it's inevitable that of course you can't master each of these domains on a super high level. So this is often a sort of question when it comes to audiovisual composition. Do you work collaboratively with a visual artist who really masters his or her domain, or do you do everything yourself? And I think each direction has advantages and disadvantages, so I wouldn't really prioritize one or the other. I'm personally more the type of person who likes to do everything himself. The reason for this is that when you really do all the work yourself, then you get to a level where you can really very tightly integrate these media together. And I wouldn't say that this is impossible in a collaborative setting, but it is much more difficult. And then, of course, the obvious advantage in collaborations is that you're working with really mature artists who are visually much more developed than I could ever be.
Mm-hmm. And in recent years, you have been working with elements of games in music. And I heard that you are a gamer yourself. And so how did this experience affect your music writing?
Well, that's another peculiar story, I would say, because yes, you can say that I'm a gamer, but I haven't been a gamer for a long time. Rather, I stumbled upon video games at an old age, you could say. So I'm definitely not like a kid who started playing computer games when I was 7 or 8 or 13, whatever. And this actually happened at a music festival, and it was by coincidence I played at a festival where there were also two other acts that performed, and by coincidence, these people were using elements from computer games, and this simply blew my mind. I found this super interesting, and it really pulled me in very spontaneously, even though I didn't really understand what they were doing, but somehow it felt very alive and fascinating for me. And I have to say, in the beginning, I was really intimidated by this whole thing, specifically for the reason that I was not a gamer and this whole world of games was very foreign to me. But I really had this strong feeling that if I ignore this, that I will miss something which might be really important for me. And so gradually I started to work my way into game studies, and I started to play games to also experience yes, this game part directly, and then I started to also integrate this into my compositions. I have to say that on one hand, games were really something I was not familiar with. On the other hand, I already had quite a lot of experience with working with open forms, meaning compositions which are not fixed in all their formal or organizational parameters, but which deliberately leave decision spaces for the performers. And this very much helped me to integrate game elements in my compositions. And one of the pieces that we will hear tonight is actually from this early phase when I was still sort of gradually exploring the possibilities of games in audiovisual composition. This is the piece Formula -1, which is from 2014. And after I wrote this piece, I also applied for funding for a research project. And I was lucky to get it, which gave me the possibility to really do thorough research in the field of game as an element of audiovisual composition. This ran from 2016 until 2021, and also we finished it with the publication of a relatively large book on the whole topic.
Mm-hmm. And if I'm not mistaken, your research project was the collaborations with Barbara Lüneburg, with violinists. And how was your research organized? What role did you have in this project?
We were a team of 3 people. So it was, as you say, Barbara Lüneburg. She was involved as one of the researchers and artists. Barbara Lüneburg is a violinist, but she has also been very active in the field of artistic research for quite a long time. We had a 3rd person on the team, which was Andreas Pirchner. He is a musicologist and also a designer. And well, the design of the research was in a way triangular, in the sense that we wanted to investigate newly created works which use game elements from 3 distinct angles. So one angle was just the perspective of composition, which was my field of responsibility. Simply the question, how do you, from a kind of technical compositional point of view, how do you work with game elements in a composition? Then the second angle was Barbara's expertise. It was the question, how do you perform these pieces? When you're working with pieces that are game-based, it means that you as a performer have to make choices, or you have sort of tasks or missions that you have to fulfill. And every time you perform this, things are going to be different. So this is a special challenge when it comes to the question of interpretation, because one thing that we realized very early on is that it's not satisfactory to just go on stage and kind of perform the game part. So in a way, you always had to play this double role, that you're performing a piece. You have to present sort of your own vision as an interpreter of the piece, and at the same time, you in a way have to deal with this openness of the game environment. So this was the second perspective, and the third perspective was that we organized concerts on a regular basis to which we invited a kind of hand-picked audience. And then we gave questionnaires to the audience and also led focus group interviews with them. And we wanted to get an impression how they experienced those pieces that we performed. This was especially interesting because we were so deeply involved in these compositions that it was very hard for us to estimate how a person who doesn't really know what's going on, what the background is, how do they perceive the pieces. And Andreas' task was to then evaluate the whole questionnaires and the interviews, etc. And so these were like the three different perspectives that we compared with each other.
I think it's very important topic about observation and maybe what new things you learn about observers and observation process in general in this through this research and through your pieces.
Well, that's a really difficult question. I have to say that when we started to evaluate those questionnaires, it was very difficult to get a really consistent impression. So we thought that there would be more agreement in how the audience perceives certain pieces. And well, to a certain extent, this was true, but also in many aspects, it was absolutely not true. So the way how people reacted to the compositions was so diverse that it was really often difficult to recognize a sort of a common trend. We did have some very interesting findings, though, and one thing that I found very important for my perspective on the whole research happened actually quite early on in the project, and that was the question: what aspects of a game-based performance the audience would associate with games? Now, when you look into game theory, what you read everywhere is that the two things that are kind of characteristic of games are that it's goal-driven and that it's based on rules. And so there, for this reason, we thought that if the audience recognizes something that reminds them of games, it's probably going to be that it's goal-driven and that it's based on rules. However, this was absolutely not the case, and that really changed our sort of whole approach to the research project. What came out in these evaluations was that the audience associated forms of interaction with games. So what they saw was that the performers on stage were sort of behaving in particular ways that they associated with games, and this behavior was this sort of spontaneous reaction, this constant alertness that they have to sort of watch out for what's going on and then make a decision or react in particular ways. And this was something that we didn't really expect, and almost nobody really cared about rules or goals. And this was an important realization because this really showed us that when we work with game elements in the context of audiovisual composition, criteria shift. So we can't simply apply what game researchers observe in normal gameplay to what happens once you transfer these elements into the context of musical composition.
I think it will be interesting to know from our audience after the performances and their reactions, and maybe you comment it too. And I would like to ask before we will start the concert, do we need as listeners to know the rules of these games? And what should we focus on as listeners when the pieces will be performed?
This is also something which can be different in every piece. The one piece that we will hear tonight is titled Kilgore. And this is a piece where I thought that, in fact, it would be handy to have a basic understanding of what's going on. However, this is going to be displayed on the screens, on the video screens. So this is a piece which is really very game-like, so it has a lot of typical game aesthetics. And so what I also used was this kind of style of head-up displays where you read as a text what you have just achieved or whether you failed or what your next mission is, etc. And that's also what I used in this particular piece. So this will be easy to follow what's going on there. In the other piece, Formula -1, you don't really have to care about rules. This is a piece where there are definitely some game rules integrated, but they are more important for the performers to know, and they will have a certain effect on how they perform, but it's not something that you as an audience member have to be aware of to sort of adequately be able to understand the piece.
Can you please tell us a little bit about the piece Formula -1, about the name of the piece and maybe the plot of this piece?
Yes. So Formula -1, as I mentioned, it's already an older piece. I composed it in 2014. And as the title also already tells, I was interested in Formula 1 in the sport. And what I found sort of interesting about Formula 1 was that it's a sport which is completely dominated by male sportsmen. And this is also remarkable because contrary to soccer, for example, in soccer you have like a male team and a female team, and this is clearly separated and they take place in different tournaments. This is not the case in Formula 1. So theoretically, you could have female drivers and male drivers side by side. But fact is that until today, no female drivers have participated in Formula 1 Grand Prix. So I was in a way interested to look at this pervasion of masculinity in this sport. This is something that I also found in a way very bothersome, these cliches of like fast and strong cars and manliness and all these things. And what I attempted to do with the piece Formula -1, you could say I attempted to sort of make a demasculinized version of Formula 1. So especially in the visuals of the piece, I'm using a lot of very saturated colors, and at other points there are kind of bubbles floating across the screen. So in a way I try to make it more look like a candy store than this sort of world of technology and machines, which is otherwise so characteristic of this sport. Yeah, so this is like in a nutshell what how I approach this project.
And at the end of our this first part of our conversation, could you please tell us a little bit about Kilgore and the rules of this game?
Yes, Kilgore is a piece which uses 3D environments. So you could say that the performers are present or they're performing in two different spaces. They will be in the same space like you are, playing their instruments. At the same time, they will be controlling avatars that are floating through 3D spaces on the screen. And I'm also saying that these are basically like two different stages, but they're present at the same time, because in the game environment, they have to do different tasks, which all have musical consequences. So they're really performing the piece by walking through the environment, interacting with certain objects, etc. And this was the first time that I worked with 3D environments. So for me, it was also a really new territory to explore how this movement in a 3D world affects this role of the player, and how these interactions with virtual objects in a virtual space can in a way also serve as a musical instrument that keeps the composition going. The piece is for two performers, and they are competing against each other. So they will have sometimes the same mission, and then according to who, for example, collects the higher number of points, this will lead to sort of the next steps and next missions in the piece. So I've composed a couple of pieces for duos because I'm very interested in this sort of competitive aspects of gameplay and how this can also affect musical performance.
So thank you so much for this exploration, and I think we are able to start our concert. And I will invite musicians of CEAM Artists. It will be Sergei Poltavsky. He will play the Formula -1 at the beginning, and then they will perform Kilgore with the participation of guitar player Nikita Korovin. So enjoy the music, and please be ready to ask something after these pieces. And so enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sergey and Nikita.
Thank you for this performance, and we will continue our third part of conversation, and we are waiting for your questions. So if you will be ready to ask something, please find Alexander and he will give you a microphone. So thank you for these pieces. For me it was very impressive performance, because I've heard Formula -1 live before this performance, but Kilgore were very impressive, and I think the dramaturgy of this piece is connected to the suite structure. Is it correct to say that the sound dramaturgy is very, in some way, classical?
Yes, well, first of all, I don't know if I said it already. I just don't know if I was audible. I would really like to thank Sergey and Nikita for these performances. Thank you very much. Um, Regarding the form, I didn't think about it, but I think your comparison absolutely makes sense. So, Kilgore consists of 5 sections, and what was important for me was to create a sort of dramaturgy where the sort of emphasis is either placed on what's going on stage or individual space. As I mentioned earlier, I really consider both of these spaces to be performance spaces. And what often happens when you have pieces that are only that are using single video projections, sometimes you almost forget that there are people on stage and actually performing. So the projection can really have such an effect that soaks you in as a viewer, and therefore it was important for me to have this kind of back and forth element of starting on stage, then going into the virtual stage place, back to stage, virtual place, back to the stage. And so in that sense, it has this sort of serial character, which is characteristic of a suite. I wouldn't say it's a dance throughout, but definitely some parts, I guess, can also be associated to it.
Yeah, not so dense, like just instrumental suite or some kind of cycles. So, do we have...
У меня есть вопрос относительно звуковысотных и ритмических алгоритмов. Что первично, звуковысотность с ритмом или некая визуальная картинка, которая определяет уже звуковысотность? Или это делается одновременно?
В какой пьесе?
Во всех. В целом можно обобщить.
So the question is about pitch and algorithm that you use. What is for you at the first place, and from what point do you start to compose the sound of this game pieces?
That's difficult to answer. In these pieces, I wouldn't say that this is always the case in my pieces, but I think in both of these pieces, it was this sort of engagement with a certain interface. So in the case of Formula -1, it is the way how the violinists control a number of electronic sounds. And in Kilgore, what I found very fascinating was these possibilities that emerge once you interact with such a virtual space, for example. And then I would say that this is something that gives like a sort of first impulse. And then when it comes to questions of pitch organization or rhythms, that's something which happens along the way. So I would say that these are not necessarily things which I plan from the outset. So there are many composers, especially like in the modernist period, in the avant-garde period, they had like the whole material ready and laid out and developed before they started to work on the actual score. And here I would say it's very much a process where I also respond to the possibilities that emerge through the interaction with certain technologies. A little bit more concretely, for example, the pitch material in Formula -1 is not predetermined. It's something that is very much the result of the interactions. So there are no fixed scales or anything like that that are underlying the piece. In Kilgore, it's different. In Kilgore, I do have a very organized pitch structures and pitch materials, or also in the last section that we heard, rhythmic patterns that are developed according to certain principles.
Thank you.
I hope this answers the question. It's difficult to kind of give a question which is generally valid for the way how I compose.
Thank you. We have another question.
Здравствуйте. Вы знаете, я не очень хорошо понимаю в электронной современной музыке, но очень интересно мне показалось. И мне интересный вопрос зафиксированности текста. Каким образом он фиксирует текст? Это интересно. Какова роль исполнителя в воспроизведении этого текста? То есть насколько свободен исполнитель в воспроизведении? И как проходит процесс разучивания произведения? То есть насколько композитор взаимодействует с исполнителем, чтобы разучить это произведение? Да. 3 вопроса в одном можно?
So the question is about scores and how did you write it and how the players are free in his actions. And the last question was about your interaction with performers. Do they need to interact with you when they are learning the piece?
Yes, so I'll go backwards through the questions. I have to say this was now really a bit adventurous for me also, because both of these pieces have never been performed without me being present. So I'm very much used to a direct contact with the performers where I can also guide them, explain things and so on. To be honest, I didn't develop these pieces as pieces which are performed without me being there. So in a way, when I composed them, I always thought that I'll be there anyway. Usually I'm in Kilgore, I performed often myself. Otherwise, I'm often also just controlling electronics. So this was definitely a very unusual situation. And so yes, I am very much used on kind of meeting the performers, interacting with them, and so on. The scores are not traditional scores in any sense. That's sort of not possible, simply really not possible when you work with game elements. You can't write normal scores simply because game pieces are based on this sort of openness and spaces of possibilities for the performers, which excludes the possibility of writing traditional notation, because this is always fixed. In the case of formula, I do have a very rudimentary score. So there are certain passages where I also prescribed concrete pitches, but the timing is usually very flexible. And other sections are only described verbally. So then I basically just describe what has to be done in a certain section. In Kilgore, it's also just a verbal description. So I have the different sections, and I basically say in the score what has to be paid attention to. And then on the screen, the players also get instructions. However, it's interesting with Kilgore, because what also happened during the process of composing the piece, but then also in the process of the rehearsals, is that I realized that the 3D space really functions as a sort of score for the musicians. Because when you look at the score, what is a score? It's a sort of graphic notation which organizes music in time. In a certain sense, this is also fulfilled by the 3D environment in Kilgore, because it takes a certain time to get from one place to another. And in the different places, there are like different things that you can interact with. So I also consciously distributed those objects in space in a way that is also sort of predetermines a sort of formal development and an organization of time. Of course, this is a completely different organization of time than what you see when you look into a traditional score. But nevertheless, I found it quite interesting during the process of the rehearsals to realize that musicians also actually started to use an image of the whole landscape as a score, where they sort of try to remember what they have to do and so on. And yeah, so of course there are no traditional scores in any sense, but in Kilgore definitely the 3D environment replaced it to a certain extent. And I don't remember, what was the first question? I think something relating to the freedom that I offer the musicians.
I think it was the second question. What can performers do? Can they improvise, for example?
Improvisation is a term that often came up when I worked with musicians on these pieces. It was also always a term which I didn't find really appropriate. I could fully understand why they used it, because of course there are sections where they really have where they have to take decisions, which means that they have a certain palette of possibilities from which they can choose. In that sense, you could say that there is an improvisatory element included. The reason why I never found it appropriate is because, in my understanding, improvisation should give you all choices as a musician. And this is definitely something which is not the case in these pieces. So here it's always rule-based. There are always sort of instructions or what you're allowed to do, but also what you're not allowed to do, and which is just typical of games. And you also wouldn't, in a way, say, let's improvise a round of chess. So it's just a different way how to engage with it, even though also in chess, of course, you have many possibilities how to move your figures. This is the reason why I always felt that improvisation doesn't really describe what's going on. But for the musicians, it also often felt as a kind of improvisation. So I would say it's something in between.
Thank you.
We have a comment from one of the performers, from Sergei Poltavsky.
Yeah.
Я, собственно, хотел вот на эти вопросы ответить тоже. И насчет первого вопроса, как это все записывается, там действительно пьесы две разные и совершенно две разные партитуры, как ноты выглядят. Если во второй нот нету. Первая вещь в том, что сразу я бы сказал, что инструмент электроскрипка в принципе используется в основном как как контроллер, как гейм-контроллер. То есть диапазон инструмента разделен на 3 октавы. Ну, от до диез, ре диез, ми, фа. Вот. И в этих диапазонах смещается, вот там был такой курсор, как бы перекрестие, и в зависимости от выше-ниже, то курсор ходит влево-вправо. Низкие звуки — это лево, высокие — право. То есть весь экран поделен на такие вот зоны. Амплитуда, то есть громкость, опять же, то есть на электроскрипке это не особенно слышно, но это как бы такая исполнительская вещь, которая чувствуется. Вот. Она управляет вертикальной осью. Вот. И там это не единственные интерактивные возможности, которые там существуют. Но вот это в основном. В медленной части, в зависимости от диапазона, в котором играют, там видео играет либо вперед, либо назад. То есть там как бы вот до катастрофы, до того, как машина разлетается на куски, и обратно она как бы собирается. То есть это глиссанда как бы вверх. Это она разбивается, потом обратно. Вот эта часть выписана нотами. Здесь написаны ноты, которые нужно играть, какой диапазон. Вот. Есть часть, которая действительно чуть более свободна, в которой написано флаги, в которой нужно исследовать тембровые возможности инструмента. И там есть как бы ограничения, но достаточно такие допускающие много свободы. И в конце снова такой финальный заезд. И в целом пьеса записана нотами, там есть какие-то сноски, указания. Вторая пьеса, нот фактически нету, они только в качестве примеров. И в основном это все текстовые описания, как правила игры вот описываются. Это такая, не знаю, 16 где-то страниц примерно с иллюстрациями, что нужно на каждом уровне делать. Вот. И в музыкальном смысле у нас там такая игра, как бы, на счет. Вот, то есть там есть как бы паттерн, который постоянный, и паттерн, который добавляется, или он изменяется. И есть определенные правила, мы как бы должны их соблюдать, и кто видит, что человек ошибся, там мы нажимаем на такой звук, громкий. И то есть это фактически полностью текстовое. Вот. Относительно того, как... еще про первую пьесу хотел сказать, что там, значит, на бейсболке была установлена камера, веб-камера, которая показывала периодически, вид, так сказать, от первого лица гонщика, то есть исполнителя на скрипке, и показывала гриф, там, пальцы, руки, все, что попадало в этот. И второй момент был установлен датчик, пьезодатчик удаленности смычка от подставки. То есть он тоже как бы влиял на тембр звука. И там отдельно была такая строчка, где написано, в какой части смычка нужно играть, в какой части, на каком расстоянии от подставки.
So Sergey just told about his experience with your scores and as a performer about electro violin and web camera and etc. Do you have any questions? I have a question because your works are in open form. How long can works last? What is timing of these game-based pieces?
Well, it totally depends on the piece. I wouldn't say that open form imposes time limits on a composition. So normally Kilgore lasts around 25 minutes, and Formula -1 is a much shorter piece. It's usually around 10 minutes. But all of these are not like single section works, so they consist of different parts, and each part has a slightly different set of rules. And if you keep working in this fashion, then you could make hour-long pieces based on open form. I don't think open form puts any restrictions on durations.
Okay, thank you. And do we have some questions? Yes, we have a question.
I have two questions. Second question is about your second piece. One question. Your second piece, Geroem. What kind of emotions do you translate to your listeners or spectators? Or your music is only for mind? And my second question is, how can I understand your music if I will be not a musician, and if the music language of your some works is not musical but only electronic?
I think what is characteristic of these works or of many game works is that they are very process-based. So I think what I want to offer as an experience is also this sort of explorative aspect. I think especially in the second piece in Kilgore, this is quite important. This means that there is like not this set idea of what it should sound like and feel like in every single moment. But as a whole, what I would like the piece, now I'm talking about Kilgore, to sort of translate to the audience is such feelings of process-oriented explorations and how you go through different environments, through different tasks, and how you handle them. For me, I would say that this is a sort of a feeling that I want to transmit with it. And in the piece of Formula -1, it is a very different. It's a much more noisy piece, which is also a sort of element which I took from the Formula 1 cars, and also some of the electronics sounds are directly derived from them. So I think the emotional quality that I want to communicate with that piece is something like something very energetic. And for me, this is a very noisy piece, but I see it as a sort of happy piece nevertheless. So for me, it has a very joyful quality as a whole.
So, thank you so much, Marco. We have one question.
Да, здравствуйте, спасибо. И вопрос про видеоигры конкретно. Во-первых, если вы играете, то в какие? И дальше, для вас видеопространство, погружение, это скорее что-то второстепенное, или вы наоборот ищете вдохновение в каких-то жанрах видеоигр? Потому что есть же еще платформы, и вообще их полно, где эмоции могут передаваться разным способом, взаимодействия персонажа с другими персонажами и так далее. Есть еще вид от третьего лица. И вот про это было бы интересно послушать. Если там ничего такого, то окей. Если техническая сторона сложная, там, например, какая-то, то тоже интересно про это послушать. Вот, спасибо.
So the question is about games. So which games do you play? Which genres? And the second question is about what inspires you in games, which genres, types of games.
Well, I have to admit I haven't played for a while. The last game I played, which I enjoyed very, very much, was Death Stranding. And so I like sort of action adventure games. And however, I've also explored quite a lot of indie games, and I made many discoveries which I found very, very exciting and unusual in the field of these independent games. When it comes to composing with game elements, I don't think that I ever really directly translated the experience of a game into a particular composition. But it was what is really, sorry, I said this already many times tonight in different contexts, but it's really this sort of question of interaction and engagement, how you get sort of involved with a particular surrounding that you find yourself in, or how certain situations or challenges that you confront in a game, how they can lead to musical interactions. The The reason why I started to experiment with games in music is not because I was in love with games and I thought now I have to bring these two things together because I like them both so much, so they have to become a unity. Actually, the reason, what I mentioned earlier tonight, what gave me this first impulse to get involved with games, it was at a point where I really, as I said, didn't know anything about games. But when I started to look into games, I just really saw a lot of possibilities which for me had a musical potential. So it was really a musical interest which led me to work with games in musical contexts. And there is also, it's another piece that you performed tonight, a different one, but I often describe also the sort of relationship between musicians that emerges through the inclusion of game elements as something which has similarities with chamber music. Now, this sounds maybe absurd at first, but when you think of chamber music, let's say a string quartet, how musicians are playing, it means, first of all, there is not a conductor. So they have to constantly pay very, very detailed attention to what all the other musicians are doing. They have to very well coordinate their actions with everybody else. So there is this constant alertness to what are my co-players doing and how can I play with them. And this is something that that often happens in different ways when you put musicians in a situation which is game-based, because it also means they have to be very, very alert to what their co-players are doing and have to very carefully and sometimes also very quickly react on what they're doing as a sort of a response, which is, of course, a reaction to the game elements, but it nevertheless creates this sort of dynamic between the players, which really can have a very immediate musical effect. And this is really what I was after. And yeah, so it was, for me, it never really felt like I want to bring these two genres together and create this hybrid, even though this is, of course, what I have effectively done. But it was really always this interest, what sort of musical possibilities does this entail, which cannot be achieved in other ways.
Thank you. We don't have questions anymore. So, Marco, thank you so much for this conversation, for your answers, and of course for your music. We're very impressed. We are happy that you are together with us tonight and at the Biomechanics Festival. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was really a great pleasure and honor to be with you. Thanks.
Thank you for all of us, all of you, I'm sorry. And we will happy to see you tomorrow, because tomorrow will be the solo concert of performance of Sergei Poltavsky. And on Friday, we will have the last concert at the Rachmaninoffsky Hall. So see you and welcome to the Biomechanics Music Festival. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Sure.